Today's training is by the Auto App Software and Training Group, Paul and Bruce Stewart. I want to thank you for coming on board. Today's class is on eCat setup and the best operation, best practices. I want to start with using the basics first, because what we're going to get into is setting up smart jobs. So what's important is that your smart jobs, your most common smart jobs are at the top, and then I like to have, and then from the ones you want at the top, I like to put it in alphabetical order. So under each smart job category, then we're going to have the smart jobs themselves. So just like oil change here, it should be a reflection of all your different oil changes. You'll notice if I click on the 5W30 that we're looking up other parts, oil filter. We're also going in and looking at engine oil, recommended engine oil, the viscosity, the engine oil capacity, and the oil filter itself. So in that case, just to show you a different makeup, I'm just going to type in water pump. This is for quick search. So anything that has water pump in it, it's going to pull up and then bring down those jobs. And you'll notice in this case that we are looking up parts. We're looking up other parts that you pull in from your inventory, and then catalog labor is looking up the labor through Mitchell through the Smart eCat. And we're going to talk about order. We're going to talk about the different layouts that. So in this case, we're going to start with a clean invoice, and we're just going to simply do an oil change. And I wanted to pick on a oil change that required more quarts than your recommended 5 quarts. In this case, we're going to look at, I'm just simply going to hit go. It's going to go through each one of the items that I have pre-set up in my smart jobs. Again, the first one's going to be, it's just recommending standard oil. I'm just simply going to hit next, and the next thing it's going to say is it recommends 5W30, but you could use 0W30, especially in your cold weather, and then you could use 10W30. In this case, we're using, if I click on it again, it puts it on the invoice itself. You'll notice it's showing liters and quarts. In this case, it's taking 6 quarts, but my default is 5. So I want to be able to charge for that additional quart. So I'm going to go ahead and hit next here. And now it's looking up the oil filter. We'll be talking a little bit about this in the inventory training class, but this should be looking up your inventory on what you have on hand and pulling from your inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and pull from my inventory. Now, you'll notice that I'm going to go ahead and say that Tim's going to do the job, that it takes 6 quarts. So in this case, I want to hit post, and I want to charge for that additional quart. So this is where you're going to see that right underneath oil change, I have add oil or BGMOA. So I want to give the option, especially on a high mileage vehicle, to be able to do an additive of motor oil. So if I picked on the BJ Advanced, I wouldn't put the additional quart because that's a quart, and I would charge it $15.85. In this case, since I know it requires a 5W30, I'm simply going to add that 5W30. And what you're going to see right here is a setup issue. You can see that that additional quart's going to the oil change, but there's no operation picked. Not necessarily an issue, but it's an issue for reporting. So I'm going to go ahead and hit post and exit. What I would prefer is it would not go to that oil change category. And the reason for that is, and I'll show that in a little bit, but in this case, we charge a $3.25 for an additional fee. So in this case, it's going to be $39.95 plus the $3.25. If I had, but you'll notice if I click on it, it's got the additional oil charge, which pulled from the Smart eCat, but no smart job. Now the key to setup is all this ties together. And if I were to jump into reporting and I was going to look at sales by labor operations, which is what that was tied to, one of our best practices and one of the classes that's on the website is the 5 key reports. This is one of the 5 key reports. When I double click on this report, what I want to be able to do is instantly see, hey, how many alignments did I do? How many oil changes did I do? So in this case, oil changes are on the second page. You can see if I just at a glance looked at this, we did 81 oil changes. But if I double click on this, you're going to notice you have 11 and 2 not found. If I double click on the 11, you'll notice it's all additional oil. So if I really wanted to know how many oil changes that we did, I need to subtract the 11 and the 2, and I really only did 70 oil changes that month. So this is why when we really start teaching at Auto Apps software and training best practices, we want to be able to say, hey, it's a real simple setup. So if you understand how to do the setup, it's really, really easy to fix. In this case, I'm going to jump back into the invoice itself, and now I want to jump into configuration. So now I'm simply opening up configuration. I'm going to open up configuration again and go to labor. And I'm going to go to my smart jobs. So in my smart jobs, it's going to be important to have my drop downs. As I talked about, we have, I've got oil change, then I've got air conditioning. Just a little bit of a trick is if I went to the plus key, I don't know if you guys saw that, but this plus key right beside here brings up the categories. You'll notice that oil is, the order is 1. The order is 1. And I'm going to default it to the oil change category. You'll notice on add oil and BGOMA, the order number is 2. If I went down to air conditioning, you can see that it's 20. I want to add something in between this. In this category, in this case, I'm just going to add something to split it apart. In this case, I'm going to make it a 19. And I'm going to just simply add it to the miscellaneous category. Now, all that's going to do for us when I cancel out of this is allow me to have a break between my different categories. So I can say this is my super fast, quick stuff, and then this is all my regular job codes that matched my labor operations in the setup itself. So again, I'm going to show you just real quickly how to make this usability really super fast. Again, just wanted to make this simple. Now let's just talk about the oil change. Again, these are going to have orders. So if I double click on this, if I want this to be the first one, then the order number is at the top right here. This is my description. This is a package price. So in this case, we're going to charge $39.95 no matter how many quarts and no matter. So this is really important when you're setting this up, because if I've got a package price of an oil change of $39.95 and I were to add an air filter to that oil change, it's still going to charge $39.95. So this is why it's important to understand package pricing. You'll notice that we have the labor guide for looking up labor. We have catalog parts where you can look up different specifications if you wanted. So I'm going to click on add here, and let's say I wanted to also look up the torque specs on the oil plug or the drain plug. Now I can just do a quick search here, and I can look up drain plugs, and you notice I can add drain plug torque. So if I hit OK here, now it lets me put in that drain plug torque. Now I may not want to look, I may want that to be a little lower on the list so I can move it down. So you're able to move up and down where you want your lookup. You also can look up and say, hey, I want to look up parts first, and I want to look up my other inventory items second. If I had additional labor, I could, so we can put this in the order that and this will make more sense when I show that to you. But what we're going to want to do is build this. Now, when I hit OK, of course, it's going to update that. Now I'm going to go back to my add oil and my MOA. Now in this case, on additional oil, you'll notice that I've got it defaulted that oil change, which I was showing you in the reports, that it's showing up in that reports. I don't want it to show up there. I want it to show up in miscellaneous. So I'm simply going to change this to miscellaneous and change this to additional oil charge. That way it doesn't default into my actual oil changes because it's not an oil change. I added to that oil change. So that was a really quick, easy fix. So this is what you've got to look at is when you're setting up your smart jobs, you're actually tying them to, from a reporting standpoint, to the category and the operation that you want to see on your reports. So again, I just fixed that. I'm going to check my other one. It's to a different category. Again, I want consistency. So I'm simply going to change that to miscellaneous, and I'm going to change that to additional oil charge. That fixes that 5W30. Now again, as we're building these smart jobs, I may want this at the top, so it's the most common. So if I were to look at this OEA, it's at a 10. So if I double click on my 5W30, I'm just simply going to make that a number 1 and hit OK. So that puts that at the top. I want this to be a number 2, so I set that at a number 2. So you'll notice that I've got, that's 1, 2, then the MOA, then the oil additive, then the 44. So again, what we're wanting to do in the setup and the configuration is make this as easy as possible that anybody in the shop can walk up and use, and after you train it, it's just simple and quick and easy, and you take away and make the ease of use really simple. So again, what we've done, just to show you, is we've simply, if I go to the smart jobs and I now go to that oil change, you'll see that I added that drain plug torque. So what that does for me when I hit go is it brings up that the specification on what it takes to torque that drain plug if you guys are torquing drain plugs. And you can see that it is at 18 foot-pounds. If I were to click on it again, it puts it on the invoice. In this case, I'll go ahead and get out of that. And you'll also see now that I fixed my additional oil, that it fixed that. Another thing we're going to look at in the setup is I'm going to keep things simple. I'm just simply going to go to cooling system. Now you can see how the brake makes it easy to separate my maintenance items from my repair items. So I'm simply going to go to cooling system, and you're going to look at water pump. You can notice that it's looking up thermostat, water pump, and radiator hoses for parts. Under labor, it's looking up the thermostat, the water pump, but it's not looking up the labor for the radiator hoses. So this is what you got to think through when you're building your smart jobs, both for maintenance and then also for repair. So in this case, I'm going to show you how this works because that becomes the most important thing on doing smart jobs, which this class is about. And I'm going to go back to labor. I'm going to go back to smart jobs. Again, I'm going to grab my category cooling system. I'm going to grab my water pump. Now, in thinking this through, if those of you that do a lot of imports, you may want to have just a water pump category by itself, where you're simply looking up water pump labor and water pump parts. You may want a water pump, thermostat, and timing belt, a timing belt kit. So you need to think through your smart jobs. You need to think through the order that you do them in. In this case, what I'm doing is my labor guide. I want to look up my parts first. I want to look up my labor second. Other parts is pulling from your inventory. I want to look at that third. And other labor is fourth. So let's say I wanted to add adding belts and hoses and upper and lower radiator hoses, I have the ability to add other jobs to my smart job, and I'm going to make that number 4. So I've got, look at that first, second, third, and fourth. Now, what I want to show you on this labor guide is I also want it to look up that water pump first, the thermostat second, and then I want it to look up radiator hoses. So in this case, I'm simply going to move the radiator hoses. I want it to look up that last. So that's under the labor guide. Under the parts, again, I want water pump first, thermostat second, radiator hose third. You're going to notice right here where it says I have add time and a minimum time. So what you really need to think here is if it looks up the water pump at 2.8, it's going to add 0.2 tenths to that water pump and make it 2.0. So the add time, and then if it looks up a water pump and sees it only takes an hour, the minimum time is going to be 1.5. So you really need to think through adding time to a job and having a minimum time. Really important on your maintenance jobs and different things. In the case of other parts, I may have multiple coolants. So in this case, I do have DexCool. I'm going to just look up out of my inventory. I'm just going to go to description and pull up anything that has the coolant attached to it, and I want to add DexCool. I may have Ford, I may have Subaru. So in this case, I may want to add to give the option of having DexCool and hose clamps and green, so you can have multiple items that you're pulling from your inventory. Again, what's important for me when I'm teaching the class is that you can look at a box, you can look at a screen, and you understand what each box and each screen means. So in this case, we're using the labor guide. We're using the parts catalog. Other labor is pulling from your labor operations. Other parts is pulling from your inventory file. So when I hit OK here, I'm going to show you what it looks like when we add it to the SmartyCat job. So I'm going to simply go back into the invoice we're working with on my Tahoe, and I go to that Smart Jobs. In this case, I'm going to go ahead and go back to cooling system, and you're going to notice I'm going to go to water pump, and now here's the order that I told it I wanted to put it in. Here's the additional coolant. In this case, I'm not going to use green. I'm going to use the DexCool. I may or may not want the radiator hoses. So I'm able to look at this. So what's happened now is if I'm looking at this job, I'm building the smart job to just be what you're wanting to look up. In this case, it does have air conditioning. So now I'm looking up. Remember, I told it to look up the water pump first. So I'm looking up that water pump. It's having trouble getting to Pro. In this case, I want to use a Napa water pump because I have a lifetime warranty on it. And I want to go ahead and use the water pump here. I'm going to go next. Now I'm simply going to go in and look up my parts. Again, I could go to O'Reilly. I can pick any one of my parts. In this case, simply picking the thermostat. The next thing is going to be the oil change kits. In this case, with Napa, I can get a radiator coolant hose kit, which gives me both hoses. So I want to go ahead and grab that kit. I'm just simply going to hit next. Now I'm looking up the water pump. If I want to throw the 0.1 in there, I could. In this case, I'm not going to be removing that. I have my 0.7 and my upper and lower radiator hoses. I'm seeing a 1.3. If I wanted to add that into those labor times, it's going to append all those together. In this case, I want to keep that as a separate line item. You'll notice that it's now putting it to that water pump. Again, I can append that, but in setup. So what you've seen now is I have the ability to look at the water pump thermostat. You'll notice if I went into this that it adds that 0.2 tenths Additional to that, I could grab that kit and move it, those hose kit parts, and move it down to that job and actually pull that job up. I could actually, if I wanted to, if I set that up correctly, pull from that labor guide and look up the labor guide for, and you remember we looked up the labor guide on the 0.3 and see that. So in the setup becomes the most important. If you want to give the customer, you can go in and actually create a discount category and discount, hey, if you do the radiator hoses, I can save you $75, and I can go ahead and add that as a discount. So again, building your smart jobs, again, just wanting you to look at the smart jobs, being able to understand why they look and feel the way they do, understanding the labor guide, understanding the catalog parts, understanding the orders, and then being able to move around. I want the decks cool ahead of the green, being able to move those around. The description is the description it pulls from. The labor category is what it's tied to as far as reporting goes. And in this case, and then we're looking at job order. So it becomes important when you're building your smart jobs that you also build your maintenance kits. And you build all your maintenance kits because let's say you're not using smart jobs. One thing that you should use smart jobs for almost instantly is setting up all your oil changes, your additional oil, and then all your maintenance service, your trans service, all those items first, because that allows you just to real quickly use smart jobs. And then as we taught in the usage and operation class, you can also use quick search and also use categories as you're slowly building all your smart jobs to match. But as I said, in the best practices, what you're wanting to do is you're wanting to, even have your alignments in smart jobs, even have, if you have an air conditioning category, then your air conditioning categories should match with your smart jobs. So as you're building those, and just again to show you how the cooling system ties out on the water pump. If I go to that water pump, this is your labor lookup here, and this is what lets you tie out, looking up that labor into that job by doing your labor lookup right here. So if I'm just wanting to look up the water pump, that's what ties your water pump right here. So you'd have to see the water pump in blue here to know that you have a labor lookup. So if you don't have a labor lookup, you won't see that labor lookup button on the job itself. So again, when you're building your smart jobs, keep it simple. We're all about simple. Build your basics jobs first. And then as you grow, understand if something is not working correctly, understanding how to very quickly and very easily go and fix each one of your smart jobs and understand how each of the jobs tie together. So this is the configuration setup of smart jobs